The deafening silence from critics of the government's growth strategy as the pound bounces back and as the cost of borrowing falls is a joy to behold. And there's more bad news for those desperate to talk Britain down as recession fears for the UK subside as well. Here is top economist Julian Jessup. He's tweeted, for those obsessed about whether the UK economy is already in recession, perhaps not. UK GDP now estimated to have increased by 0.2% in Q2, revised up from the first estimate of a 0.1% fall. And anyone worth their salt in the world of economics will tell you, notwithstanding the pros and cons of these tax cuts, if a recession does happen, which is increasingly unlikely, it will be shorter and shallower thanks to the most misunderstood budget in history. What's worse, relatively small borrowing to lower taxes and boost the economy, helping businesses and individuals, or a recession? Tax cuts or a recession? What an impossible choice. Now, it's been an interesting few days in which the media and the markets have, in my view, lost their marbles. It reminds me of the pandemic when we had the Kent variant and those predictable quarters of the Britain-hating press dubbed us Plague Island. Do you remember that? Our own journalists referred to Britain as Plague Island because we had a bit of COVID. That was until the virus hit the continent and tore through Germany, Belgium and France. Well, you're seeing a similar story with the economic headwinds. Suddenly, Britain is out of the firing line as inflation soars in countries like Germany, with recession expected across the Eurozone and with the European Central Bank making it clear they will have to intervene. Germany has inflation of 10.9% and Holland have got inflation of 17.1%. But we're the basket case? Really? Far from it. After a few days of turmoil, the pound has strengthened, borrowing costs have fallen, and having hopefully seen off the threat of a deep recession thanks to the mini budget, we ought to have an economy that's in modest growth by next year. If she holds her nerve, Liz Truss can go from zero to hero. Normally, you've got to wait for an election to vote for change. But with the arrival of Liz Truss, change has already happened. Of course, she could have introduced these changes more gradually, but she's hit the ground running. She's taken the view that she's got 2 years and she's going to do everything she can from day one. The opposite of 99% of politicians who never seem to get round to delivering their promises. What is Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's crime exactly? Merely that they seek to make Britain an attractive place for investment and a powerhouse of economic activity. And this challenges the orthodoxy. The IMF, who have predictably been critical of this budget, is caught up in the dogma of centre-left politics and economics, namely big state, big debt, big tax and anaemic growth. Trussonomics, whilst being a bit of a white-knuckle ride, is one in the eye to this economic groupthink that sees ever-increasing roles for the state and the long, slow and painful economic death that is tax and spend. By going it alone and going for growth, Britain is doing the equivalent of what Sweden did during the pandemic, which is to ignore established wisdom, look at the data and go our own way. In the case of Sweden, they kept schools open, shops and businesses. They didn't ask you to wear a mask and they didn't have a single day of lockdown, not one day of lockdown. They were attacked at the time, just as Britain is being attacked now for its economic vision. But the Swedes are laughing all the way to the bank, having suffered a fraction of the economic damage of most other Western nations, us included, that decided it would be a great idea to shut down the economy for 2.5 years, borrow £500 billion, close once viable businesses and pay perfectly healthy people to stay at home. Post-pandemic, as far as I'm concerned, expert is now a 4-letter word. I won't accept any orthodoxy going forward, including in relation to the economy. In the end, organisations like the IMF just can't bear Britain thinking independently and exercising its newfound sovereignty. Most establishment commentators are furious about Brexit and therefore we're hoping to see Britain's bid for growth horribly backfire. Take a look at this week's front cover of The Economist. Look at this shocker. Now, if you're listening on GBNews radio, it's an illustration of Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss on a sinking boat labelled Great Britain. The headline, How Not to Run a Country. The extent to which certain quarters of the press loathe Britain is astonishing. This country is breaking the rules, it's smashing the dogma, and it's leading the way in becoming what I believe will be, in time, a model for the 21st century economy. And we can watch with amusement and pleasure as bankers flock to the UK from Paris, Frankfurt and Madrid, keen to earn their bonuses here, spend their money here and pay their taxes here. I want their cash, don't you? Friday's mini-budget annoyed all of the right people. And as the markets settle, history will prove it was the right thing to do. This quote from The Telegraph's brilliant Sherelle Jacobs sums it up for me. She tweeted, what Truss's critics won't acknowledge is that the alternative to her gamble is a long, hard recession, ever higher tax hikes, chronically disintegrating public services, zero growth, stagnant productivity, and a country kept on life support by artificially low interest rates. Hysteria around interest rates need to calm down too. Don't take my word for it. Here is former economic advisor to Margaret Thatcher and the chief architect of Trussonomics, Professor Patrick Minford, who spoke to me on this channel last night. Lots of viewers that are worried about coming out of a fixed rate, they've got a mortgage, and there's talk of 6, 7, 8% in the months and years ahead. How high do you think interest rates could go as a result of this new approach to the economy, which is pro-growth?
No, I think 3% is about the peak. You see, it's been quite interesting to see how all the volatility has had one good effect. It's kind of forced the bank to come up and say it's going to raise rates more boldly. So we've already got very tight money. And so this actually has strengthened the bank's hand because it's already got very tight money. And now it can take its time to actually raise interest rates. And as you know, they bought some government bonds this week to kind of calm the markets. And they weren't just helping the pension funds. Of course, that was an important element in the whole thing. But they were also signaling that they think those rates aren't going to happen. They're too high.
Well, that's good news, isn't it? If we're going to help everyone in society, particularly the poorest, if we're going to invest in public services, in infrastructure, if we're going to tackle the cost of living crisis and improve outcomes for our youngsters, we've got to go for growth. And those taking such pleasure at slagging Britain off need to grow a pair. Post-pandemic, I've had enough of establishment groupthink. Friday's mini-budget had a rough birth, but I believe it will ultimately move the dial for our economic prospects. That mini-budget will be step one into making Britain great again. Yes, the budget was poorly presented and explained, and it was an open goal not to get the Office for Budget Responsibility to give it the once-over, which they now will. But the fundamentals were right and will, in time, bear fruit. We've got to go for growth. Britain's critics need to grow up, and the markets, they do need to grow a pair. As the world falls into recession, Britain may well buck the trend. Far from being Plague Island, if we play our cards right, we'll be the envy of the world. We didn't budget for that, did we?